Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
3 recent solicitations offer an interesting glimpse into the Trump administration's influence on federal procurement. From the overhaul of the federal acquisition regulations to the push for consolidation and centralization, these 3 requests for proposals demonstrate how agencies are implementing and accepting the Office of Management and Budget's prioritization of reforming federal technology and acquisition management. In his reporter's notebook, executive editor Jason Miller writes about how the RFPs from Commerce, Treasury, and GSA are demonstrating the changes that are happening, and Jason joins me now to discuss. Jason, welcome aboard.
Thanks, Eric.
So why these 3 RFPs? What stood out about them, and what made you want to look into them and write about them?
I think there's 3 things that really kind of stood out to me. First of all, they're all for big technology acquisition type of projects, and those always are attractive. They gain a lot of interest in the community. A lot of people want to talk about them. Second, we'll get into this later, they were hidden behind the firewall that's called eBuy. Eric, I'm not going to get on my soapbox right now. I'll do that later. So that really makes it also interesting because they're not necessarily easy to find, and I think that it really does show that GSA, Treasury, Commerce really aiming for a specific set of vendors, not wired or anything, but just on the schedules contract as an example. But third, and this is really where it stood out to me, and this is what clicked among those 3, is each of them in their own way are saying, hey, the administration wants to change the way acquisition is done. We've talked about the FAR overhaul, the rewrite. Hey, here's new ways to approach acquisitions. And each of those kind of take a piece of it and show how that's being pushed into actual implementation. And that's what's really important here. So many times OMB, and this is not to pick on OMB, but they put out a policy, and then what happens from that policy? We hear that time and again from federal executives, former federal executives. The proof will be in the pudding, Eric. The rubber will hit the road. And I think these 3 just showed me, hey, look, here's an example of that rubber actually hitting the road.
All right, so let's break them down. Why don't we start with the Commerce Department? Tell us a little bit about the project that RFP is involved with and what's going on there.
2 things about the Commerce acquisition that stood out to me. Number 1, they actually put an announcement out on sam.gov to say, hey, we're going to be doing this against the GSA schedule. So kudos to Commerce for at least telling folks from a transparency perspective that this is their plan versus just hiding behind that wall that's called eBuy. So this is a new cloud vehicle. It's embodying several of the administration's goals. It's consolidating multiple cloud contracts across the Commerce into one blanket purchase agreement. This is going to be a 10-year contract with a ceiling of $4.1 billion. It's going out as a blanket purchase agreement or a BPA under GSA schedules contract. Again, utilizing the FAR deviation that allows agencies to create BPAs on top of schedule contracts. So there's a good example of rubber hitting the road. Commerce is also saying, hey, we're going to embrace this idea of contracting directly with OEMs, original equipment manufacturers. Now, obviously, cloud, there's no quote-unquote equipment, but they want to contract directly with cloud service providers versus going through, an example, a value-added reseller, going through a third-party systems integrator. And again, the administration has been very clear about wanting to do business with the companies that are providing that product or service versus, again, a third party. So I think those are 2 things that really stood out to me. Now, what they're trying to do basically is unclear because we can't see the entire RFP. We can know that they're trying to do a couple things like deal with the massive compute elasticity needs. They have huge global backbones. They have specific hardware for AI and machine learning and weather modeling. So there's a lot there that they're trying to do through this approach. So I think the fact is they're taking several contracts and consolidating them. In fact, I talked to the acting chief technology officer at Commerce, Mathis Passos, and he talks about that cloud is a huge spend under the Commerce Department's budget. Their IT budget was $2.9 billion in 2025. So cloud is a big piece of that. And he said, listen, it's gotten to the point where we can't really defend having different contracts with different prices and different terms and conditions. And we want to drive toward this idea of one commerce for all common IT services like cloud computing. And then we want the flexibility that comes with buying cloud services. He said that the Commerce Department actually put together an internal working group led by NIST and NOAA to really help lead this effort. So again, Eric, we're looking at different examples of how the administration is pursuing or wants agencies to pursue specific directions, and here's evidence that they're doing that.
Speaking here with Federal News Network Executive Editor Jason Miller. All right, and what about Treasury and GSA? Tell us a little bit more about those RFPs.
Let me start with Treasury first. This is also very interesting because this goes into the consolidation and centralization bucket of the administration's policies. What Treasury is doing is, again, they put a blanket purchase agreement out on top of a GSA schedule, again, using the deviation in the FAR that the FAR overhaul really established. And their goal is to consolidate disparate core financial management systems onto something called one FM. Now, this will be for all of Treasury, but also, and this is where it's really important, they want to act as a shared service for 34 other agencies. And these other agencies range from like HUD, which is a pretty big agency, to NARA, which is a medium-sized agency, to a lot of smaller and micro agencies like the Consumer Product Safety Commission. So again, they're going to provide core financial management systems, one system for all of these agencies. Again, I'll say very similar to what we're seeing, Eric, with the HR IT effort that OPM is pursuing as well, where they're trying to have one HR system for all of government. Now, again, this goes back to the 2025 executive order from March that President Donald Trump signed, calling for, among other things, the consolidation of agency financial management systems. Now, the Bureau of Fiscal Service is leading this effort. They want basically a approved software as a service core financial management solution, and they're looking for a lot of services around it. Treasury estimates it could spend roughly just under about $1 billion, $987 million on this entire effort to consolidate existing systems, which come from Oracle, SAP, and even one that the IRS developed in-house. So again, I think this is really what's interesting about this is not just that, hey, we're going to have a shared service, but here's a clear signal of how that consolidation will work. The second one I want to talk real quick about is a solicitation from GSA's Technology Transformation Service. It's called their Next Generation IT Solutions BPA, or NEXT. Now, I wrote about this back in February, and basically what they're trying to do is say we're going to have a multiple word contract and or a single word contract, depending on the functional areas, to provide different technology services, everything from DevSecOps and modern software deployment to digital services and experience design and delivery to cloud infrastructure and cyber services to digital identity and fraud protection. And of course, Eric, it has to be AI strategy and implementation. Now, this 5-year contract has a ceiling of about $700 million. And what GSA TTS is doing is they're looking at some of the more innovative procurement techniques that have been highlighted in the FAR overhaul and in the associated practitioners' albums, and they're going to use them, like the periodical table of acquisition innovation. They're going to look at multi-phase quote submission evaluations, advisory down selects. Eric, none of this is blowing my mind here, but again, you've got to do it. You've got to exercise these muscles and really put it out there. And I think all three of them, Commerce, Treasury, GSA, TTS, are just great examples of the rubber hitting the road. I'll use that cliche for you.
Are there any folks who don't think they're so great and think that maybe those agencies might be overstretching a bit in these reformed proposals, should we call them? What are some of the frustrations that are being voiced about them?
As you know, Eric, with any large procurement, any multiple award procurement, you are going to face some challenges around bid protests. Let's just take the Commerce Department one. That's maybe a little bit easier because they're opening the door to all the main hyperscale service providers. So you're not going to have a situation where the DoD did several years ago with its JEDI procurement, where they wanted to award one contract and then add others later. Commerce is opening the door for, hey, if you are a hyperscale cloud service provider, we'll talk to you. GSA TTS may be facing a tougher choice because a lot of these technology services that they're asking for are done by a lot of different contractors. Some are small business set-asides, some are not. They are trying to limit awards to maybe 5 per category in some cases. And again, there's a lot of people who provide these services, so they can be facing a lot of different potential protests. Treasury and the financial management one, there are fewer companies that have a approved financial management system that can really serve large agencies like this. But again, very similar to what we're seeing with OPM. Trying to go down to one is always difficult because the vendors mean they feel like they're getting locked out. Now, then there's the bigger frustration, Eric, and this is where I told you I would get to this later. I will pull out my soapbox and I will step on it. The biggest frustration among all three of these procurements is they're behind the firewall of eBuy. And I know people are, argue with me and debate with me why that's okay. But the more people I talk to, including former feds who now see it from my experiences, is hiding behind eBuy and not putting this out so everyone can see really does a disservice to the agencies, and it does a disservice for the broader federal community. I will not, if people want to read about my rants, I've done this many times on paper and on the air. I will not step forward, but I will ask GSA, I'll ask Laura Stanton, the acting commissioner of FAS, tear down that eBuy wall once and for all.
All right, we'll stand by and wait for that next soapbox cheer. Federal News Network Executive Editor Jason Miller, thank you as always.
My pleasure, Eric.
And you can find more of Jason's reporting and his reporter's notebook at federalnewsnetwork.com.